Zhu Yuanzhang started with nothing more than a single bowl, yet step by step he ultimately unified the realm. This man, known as the epic-level commoner emperor, relied on exceptionally steady strategic wisdom to reach success. However, barely a generation later, his grandson Zhu Yunwen, in the struggle for the throne against his uncle Zhu Di, made one blunder after another in both decisions and actions, ultimately allowing Zhu Di to overturn the situation and seize the throne. So then, what critical mistakes did Emperor Jianwen actually make, and on what grounds did Zhu Di manage to win this power struggle, one that by all rights should have been impossible for him to succeed in? Today, let us take a look at Zhu Di's battle for power, known as the Jingnan Campaign. In July 1399, history records the beginning of Zhu Di's launch of the Jingnan Rebellion. For matters to escalate to the point of princes meeting each other in open battle already showed that the imperial court's suppression strategy had serious flaws. Even so, Prince of Yanzhou Di initially had only 800 men. Although he controlled Beiping and surrounding areas through force and intimidation, on the map of the Ming Empire he held but a tiny patch of land, not even comparable to the scale of An Lushan's uprising in earlier times. In contrast, in Nanjing, Zhu Yunwen held in his hands the entire state apparatus left behind by his grandfather. His advantage was overwhelming. Yet precisely because of this, the initial mindsets of both sides were vastly different. For Zhu Di, a single loss would mean total defeat, so every step had to be cautious. But Zhu Yunwen, relying on the favorable situation, acted recklessly, believing that as long as he sent troops to punish, the rebel would be crushed with ease. Let us first look at the map. The garrison at Datong in Shaanxi could march out through Zhuyong Pass and strike at Beiping's rear. The garrison in Liaodong could harass the Yongping region through Shanhai Pass. If combined with the main southern forces pushing north from the North China Plain and the Grand Canal, how could his imperial uncle Zhu Di resist? Yet, Zhu Yunwen did not do this. In dealing with his fourth uncle, perhaps he never formed a clear plan at all. His strategic intentions were extremely vague. Raised in the imperial palace, he had never gained experience on the northern frontier. He simply kept sending troops northward, yet lacked any clear and efficient overall strategy. Zhu Di, on the other hand, was entirely different. From the day he raised his forces, his objective was only one: Nanjing. Since the realm already bore the Zhu surname, as long as he seized the capital Nanjing and claimed the throne, there was no need to waste strength capturing every other place. Thus, from the very start of Jingnan, his every move was aimed at advancing toward Nanjing. To achieve this, two things had to be done. First, he had to withstand attacks and hold Beiping. Second, he had to expand his power while fighting. In other words, as long as he could gain enough time to grow, he would have the chance to strike back. With this strategy in mind, Zhu Di began the first phase of defensive counterattack. The southern court dispatched a 130,000-strong vanguard under the veteran general Geng Bingwen, stationing them at Zhongding. The disparity in numbers was overwhelming. If Geng Bingwen advanced step by step, Zhu Di would surely be defeated. So Zhu Di chose to strike first, launching a sudden attack that forced Geng Bingwen to pause and withdraw temporarily. But once Geng Bingwen retreated, Zhu Yunwen grew anxious. He immediately replaced the commander on the spot, a grave taboo in military affairs. Worse still, the replacement was Li Jinglong. Though not entirely incapable of battle, he lacked the experience of commanding large armies. Yet, Zhu Yunwen entrusted him with a force of 500,000. At first, the greater numbers widened the gap in strength even further. In the south, Zhu Di could not afford rash assaults. Even if he desired to charge, not every subordinate was as fierce as Zhang Liao of old. To break the deadlock, only one option remained: adjust the strategy. But how? His eyes turned toward his younger brother, the Prince of Ning, Zhu Quan, who was sitting idle in the north. Zhu Di then took two steps. First, he delayed the imperial army, ordering Beiping to hold fast. Second, he personally led a rapid northern strike to surprise Danning, forcibly dragging Prince of Ningzhu Quan into the conflict and seizing the elite cavalry under his command. This was undoubtedly a risky move, yet in a struggle of the weak against the strong, one must dare to take risks along the path with the highest probability of success. And a man's triumph depends not only on his own efforts, but also on the quality of his opponent. For example, Li Jinglong's siege of Beiping dragged on for over half a month without success. By the time Zhu Di returned from Danning and reached the battlefield near Gushanxi, the situation began to shift. At that time, the standoff between the two armies had already lasted until the 10th month of the lunar calendar. In the land of Yanjing, the north wind howled and bitter cold gripped the earth. The Imperial army from the south was far less resistant to the cold than Zhu Di's northern troops. In addition, their winter clothing was inadequately prepared, so the soldiers' hands and feet became numb from frost, and their combat effectiveness plummeted. Even Napoleon, who suffered from the effects of severe cold-on warfare, would surely have sympathized with this. Zhu Di, quick to seize the opportunity, dispatched the newly recruited cavalry to launch a fierce assault on Li Jinglong and then sent more horsemen to encircle him. Li Jinglong was utterly defeated and fled. This general, worthy of being called a master of retreat, abandoned a vast amount of supplies that very night and left them to Zhu Di, while he himself hastily withdrew back to Dezhou. This victory allowed the northern Tatar tribes to see an opportunity for political maneuvering. They moved in from the desert to pledge support, further strengthening Zhu Di's power. By the following April, as the weather warmed, Li Jinglong finally managed to complete his recuperation in comfort. Not only had he replenished his troops to 600,000 men, but the grain supplies were also more abundant. This time, it seemed there was no excuse to lose. The two armies faced each other at the Baigu River. Cavalry units on both sides clashed head-on across the vast North China plain. In the first wave of attacks, Li Jinglong indeed showed improvement. Relying on his crushing numerical superiority, he even used Zhu Di's own cavalry flanking tactics against him, encircling Zhu Di's forces. Even though Zhu Di's northern army was fierce, in sheer numbers they could not match the southern troops. At the critical moment, Zhu Di once again demonstrated his ability to reverse the situation against all odds. Leading a fresh cavalry unit, he suddenly broke through the encirclement, separated from his main force, and before Li Jinglong could respond, he circled back from the rear to launch a fierce strike. Taking advantage of the wind, fires were set ablaze, and once the flames rose, the southern army's morale collapsed. The chaos gave the northern troops the chance to counterattack. Amid the fire and heavy smoke, Zhu Di reunited with his main force, and the entire army charged forward. In this single battle, Li Jinglong once again retreated to Dezhou and soon after withdrew further to Jinan. Thus, the first stage of the Jingnan Campaign, which had lasted 9 months, came to an end. Zhu Di had essentially accomplished his two main goals, defending Beiping and strengthening his forces. But the path to Nanjing was still long, and so the conflict entered a second stage of strategic stalemate. As the southern army retreated to Jinan, Zhu Di's main forces also advanced to the city. What then happened in Jinan? The city, with Mount Tai to the south and the Daching River to the north at the time, sat securely on the plains between them. What should Zhu Di do? Lay siege to the city? Previously, whether fighting Geng Bingwen or Li Jinglong, he had always won through field battles, never by storming fortified cities. Now, after a long march from Baigu River, launching a siege was hardly a wise choice. Moreover, although Jinan was an important stronghold, its southern side was blocked by mountains, making it impossible to advance south from there. If Zhu Di wished to move toward Nanjing, he could simply take the plain and canal routes. There was no need to waste strength in a costly battle at Jinan. Thus, Zhu Di's likely strategy was to use the waters of the Daching River to temporarily contain the city, while he recruited volunteers in Hebei to expand his army. Early records mention only one event from these 3 months of encirclement, Zhu Di channeling water to flood Jinan. Beyond that, there is nothing else. 3 months later, Zhu Di withdrew back to Beiping. Through this round of recruitment, he gained significant strength to bolster his strategic position. Taking advantage of this moment, Sheng Yong of Jinan marched out to retake Dezhou. Together with Ping An from Zhengding and the troops from Changzhou, they formed a triangular formation, tightly guarding against Zhu Di. Records of Sheng Yong are extremely scant, to the point that even his place of origin is unknown. Ping An, however, came from far more distinguished roots. He was not only a descendant of meritorious officials, but had even been adopted by Zhu Yuanzhang. In a sense, he was something like Zhu Di's foster brother. Faced with such a situation, what should Zhu Di do? Should he directly march south? Looking at the map, in the short term, Zhu Di did indeed have the option of bypassing Jinan. But what then? Should he rush straight toward Nanjing? Consider this. In the spring and autumn period, how did the younger brother of Duke Zhuang of Zheng fail? What if those three armies seized the chance to raid Beiping, his home base, or encircle him from behind? That would be the end. So Zhu Di still had to fight, but he could not engage in a war of attrition, as it would drain his strength. Instead, he needed to continue leveraging the advantage of flexible and ever-changing tactics, choosing to strike at the southern army's supply lines, forcing them out of their fortifications and dragging them into open field battles where the northern troops excelled. For this, Zhu Di once again displayed brilliant maneuvering. He feigned a grand march eastward, loudly proclaiming his intention to launch a campaign to the east. But only a few days later, the entire army then suddenly turned covertly to the south and, taking advantage of Kangzhou's garrison being completely unprepared, launched a surprise attack and captured Kangzhou outright. After that, he bypassed Dezhou, instead marching south toward Linqing, seizing superior ground and cutting off Sheng Yong's rear supply counties. Now Sheng Yong was out of options. He could only lead his troops south and encamp at Dongchang. Seeing the enemy forced out of the city, Zhu Di immediately led his army back to engage in battle. The second phase produced the largest battle yet. By this time, Sheng Yong's forces had been equipped with large numbers of firearms and poisoned crossbows, which placed enormous frontal pressure on Zhu Di's troops. Commanding a large army is an enterprise with almost no room for error. Under heavy pressure, the frontline units made judgment mistakes and failed to coordinate effectively with the cavalry's flanking attacks. The main force was therefore heavily battered, suffered severe losses, and was forced to withdraw north, falling back all the way to Beiping. This defeat was, without doubt, Zhu Di's worst setback since the campaign began. His senior general Zhang Yu fell in this battle. Yet thanks to the successes in the first phase, the southern army did not mount an organized offensive for more than a month, which allowed Zhu Di to recuperate during January and February of 1401. Zhu Di then returned with renewed force. His primary task remained eliminating the two armies besieging Dezhou. Logically, the previous overarching strategy was still correct. Keep playing to strengths and avoiding weaknesses, and press the enemy at night. Thus, he advanced to the area near the Hutua River between the two cities, while at the same time sending feints toward Zhengding to confuse the opponent. With these maneuvers, Zhu Di successfully avoided a pincer attack and was able to face Sheng Yong directly. Previously, the southern side had gained the upper hand with firearms and poisoned crossbows, and naturally wanted to keep exploiting that advantage. But Zhu Di's tactical thinking was very clear. He would not repeat the same mistake. This time he came prepared. During the 2 months of rest and review, he discovered that the key to Sheng Yong's tactics was not solely the high-intensity output of firearms and poisoned arrows. Under the technical conditions of the time, long-range firepower simply could not match later handheld guns. Once friendly cavalry closed to melee range, the long-range weapons lost their edge. The reason firearms and poisoned crossbows could be reliably effective was the airtight protection of the army's peripheral shield walls. Once the shield wall was breached, those long-range units posed little threat. Therefore, Zhu Di ordered a secret weapon prepared, a kind of long spear with a groove. He had warriors hurl these into the shield wall with force. Once such a grooved long spear pierced a shield, it was difficult to pull out, and it was heavy. If 2 or 3 were stuck into a single shield, the shield's balance would immediately be thrown off and the shield wall would collapse. Under this tactic, gaps quickly opened in the shield wall. The northern troops seized the opportunity and loosed volleys of arrows, directly routing soldiers who had lost shield protection. Again, command of a large army leaves almost no room for error. Now the southern forces were subjected to a pressure test. Shang Yong's firearm units were affected first. Their hit rates dropped sharply and in some cases ignited powder stores accidentally, setting portions of the formation ablaze. Zhu Di's cavalry charged into the chaos, inflicting devastating wounds on the southern army, which was forced into a sequence of defeats and retreated all the way back to Dezhou. Zhu Di pressed the advantage relentlessly. He sent men disguised as Ming envoys toward Zhongding, circulating rumors that the northern army had marched south and exhausted its provisions, and that its soldiers were stealing grain everywhere. Zhongding's defenders, fearing the truth of these reports and imagining the northern camp emptied, hurried to organize forces for an attack. But when they advanced to Gaocheng, Zhu Di caught them in the act and delivered a severe blow. By this point, Zhu Di's tactics of pursue and crush chased the enemy, and once caught, strike with full force had scored major successes in engagements against both southern columns. Only then did Emperor Zhu Yunwen recall the initial plan, order the Datong garrison to sortie through Juyong Pass, set up blockades near Yizhou, and have the Liaodong garrison slip through Shanhai Pass to harass Yongping and threaten the rear. But the question was, why hadn't this been done from the start? Had such a strategy been coordinated with the main offensives at the outset, it would have been uncertain whether Zhu Di could have held on. By now, however, Zhu Di commanded far more than the original 800 men. He mounted a direct assault that overran the Datong camps, and then sent detachments to physically dissuade the Liaodong advance, quickly eliminating the northern threat. Reaching this point, Zhu Di's strategic clarity and tactical flexibility had become increasingly decisive. What remained was how to use this advantage to secure a complete victory. In December 1401, after resting for about a month, Zhu Di set out from Beiping for the 3rd time. The campaign thus entered its 3rd stage, a phase of rapid and relentless advance. The reason for this renewed offensive was that more than 2 years had already passed since the war began. Though Zhu Di had won many victories, his territory had not expanded much and remained largely confined to Hebei. This situation was unfavorable to him, for the court still held the legitimacy of imperial authority, possessed a larger population, and had greater resources with which to rebuild. The longer the war dragged on, the more the balance of victory could shift toward the court. Therefore, Zhu Di resolved not to waste more time in stalemate with the southern army, but to march straight to Nanjing. Even if he lost communication with Beiping, even if he plunged deep into enemy territory, as long as he captured Nanjing, victory would be his. Without hesitation, he surged forward, passing between the armies of Ping An and Shangyong. This time, he no longer bothered with Shandong, but instead charged directly past Xuzhou and Suzhou, Anhui, advancing toward Nanjing at breathtaking speed. Seeing Zhu Di drawing ever closer to the capital, both Ping An and Shangyong could no longer sit still. Ping An set out from Zhongding, following in pursuit, hoping to catch up with Zhu Di. Shangyong moved more directly, bypassing south to organize defenses along the Huai River, intending to block Zhu Di in the north. Thus, Zhu Di was again caught between two opponents, but this time the threat came from north and south rather than east and west. What was to be done? Though determined to push southward, if Zhu Di ignored the pursuing force behind him, he risked encirclement and annihilation. That would mean total disaster. Zhu Di decided first to deal with Ping An. The reason was that Ping An had marched out for a long pursuit, which gave Zhu Di both the advantage of conserving effort and the advantage of fighting in open battle. Moreover, Zhu Di excelled at using ambushes. After several clashes near Suzhou, Anhui, Ping An was forced to retreat into the nearby city of Lingbi. This created a dilemma. If Zhu Di ignored him, it would be like leaving a ticking bomb behind his back. But if he laid siege and it dragged on like Li Jinglong's defense for half a month, the southern army would have time to prepare defenses and encirclement. That would be too late. The city had to be taken quickly. Zhu Di noticed that Lingbi's supplies were insufficient, relying on external convoys of grain. To secure this lifeline, Ping An had to personally lead troops to escort the provisions. Zhu Di seized the chance, ambushing the supply route. As a result, Ping An not only failed to deliver grain back to the city, but also lost much of his forces and supplies. Soon he could no longer hold out. Forced to attempt a breakout, Ping An's forces collapsed in chaos, and he himself was quickly captured. This battle utterly destroyed Ping An's core. The only remaining obstacle to Zhu Di was Sheng Yong's army. In earlier field battles, Sheng Yong had fought Zhu Di to a standstill, but this time he neither defended a city nor sought open battle. Instead, he relied on the naval forces, lining his fleet along the southern bank of the Yellow River to exploit the advantage of water warfare. He knew Zhu Di had never fought a large-scale naval battle in his advance from the north, and thus assumed his lack of experience would be fatal. The plan was not unreasonable. But Zhu Di was skilled at turning disadvantage into advantage. If they thought he was no good at naval warfare, he would put on a performance. He made a show of fussing with warships, acting like an inexperienced fool preparing for a clumsy battle. In reality, he quietly dispatched cavalry westward, who crossed the river by small boats to strike Sheng Yong's rear. When the surprise attack was launched, Sheng Yong was completely unprepared. His fleet collapsed instantly. Once Zhu Di crossed the Huai River, the next and nearly final barrier was the Yangtze River. Without crossing the Yangtze, Nanjing would remain beyond reach. Sheng Yong, retreating from the Huai, understood this and refused to give up. At Gaozi, near Zhenjiang, he again organized a naval defense to block Zhu Di's path. By this time, Zhu Yunwen had little left to rely on. His confidant Fang Xiaoru claimed that the Yangtze, with 100,000 troops defending, could block any invasion. They even ordered all ships on the northern bank burned, believing that Zhu Di could never cross. But those who treated the Yangtze as an invincible barrier had often been proven wrong, and Fang Xiaoru was no exception. Though the ships on the north bank had been destroyed, Zhu Di secured a new fleet from places such as Gaoyu and Taizhou, and combined with captured southern vessels, the northern army was now able to defeat Sheng Yong in naval combat. The crossing was achieved. After the Yangtze was crossed, only the walls of Nanjing remained. For 2 years, no one had expected that the emperor's uncle could actually reach the capital. Zhu Yunwen, in panic, hastily mobilized laborers to repair the walls. But before they could be completed, his other uncle, Prince of Guju Hui, together with his old ally Li Jinglong, gave him a bitter surprise. They opened the Jinchuan Gate, allowing Nanjing to fall without a fight. Looking back on the Jingnan Campaign, we can see that Zhu Di's success, aside from some elements of luck, was built largely on his clear advantages in both strategy and tactics. Compared with the southern court's chaotic approach, acting as the thought occurred, lacking any systematic plan, the northern army's grand strategy remained consistently clear and firm. This was the very embodiment of superiority at the strategic level. Guided by this, whether in the first stage of defensive counterattacks, the second stage of repeated offensives, or the third stage of rapid advances, Zhu Di was able to employ flexible tactical methods to create local advantages time and again, achieving tactical superiority. In contrast, the southern army, starting with the upper hand, step by step squandered its advantage, gradually collapsed, and even suffered internal betrayal. Zhu Di's strategic and tactical thinking not only won him victory in the Jingnan Campaign, but also left behind invaluable lessons for history. In the words of another commander who later triumphed against much stronger foes, this is called, "In strategy, despise the enemy. In tactics, respect the enemy."